A woman traces the outline of her lover's sleeping face with her fingertip, never quite touching skin. Her hand hovers, trembling with a desire that burns deeper than any flame could sear flesh. You know this moment, that breath before the confession, the second before you reach for what you've wanted for months, years, only to discover your hand passes through them like smoke. We tell ourselves we hunger for another person, but what if every kiss is just the collision between two different kinds of emptiness? The woman rises and walks barefoot through a museum that has materialized around their bed. Each exhibit case contains a different kind of longing, crystallized, preserved, labeled with brass plaques that read in languages she almost recognizes. Here, the desperate kiss of teenagers behind school gymnasium walls, suspended in amber. There, the ghost of a touch between strangers on a crowded train, captured like lightning in glass. Each display pulses with its own light, each one a different shade of the same eternal ache. She stops before the largest case. Inside, two figures eternally approach each other across a vast, empty space. Their arm outstretched, their faces twisted with beautiful agony. The plaque reads, "The will to love, Schopenhauer's cruelest joke." She presses her palm to the glass and watches as her reflection splits into countless fragments, each one reaching toward something different, something absent, something that was never really there to begin with. The cases begin to crack. One by one, the hungers spill out like smoke, filling the museum with whispered promises and half-forgotten names. The woman realizes she is not the visitor here. She is the exhibit. She has always been the exhibit. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the cases, countless other figures trace the outlines of lovers who fade like mist the moment they're almost touched. The museum collapses back into the bedroom. Her lover sleeps on, unaware that his face has become a screen onto which she projects every hunger she's ever felt but never named. She withdraws her hand, having never touched him at all. This is projection, the ancient magic trick of the psyche that transforms every stranger into a mirror, every lover into a screen for our own unfulfilled desires. Coined by Sigmund Freud and refined by Jung, projection reveals how we unconsciously attribute our own emotions, fears, and longings to others. In the workplace, we see our insecurities reflected in colleagues' imagined judgments. On social media, we scroll through curated lives, projecting our fantasies of fulfillment onto strangers' highlight reels. In relationships, we fall in love not with the person before us, but with our own emotional landscape painted onto their unsuspecting soul. Schopenhauer understood this cruel deception of the will, that force he believed drives all existence toward endless, unfulfillable desire. What we mistake for love, he argued, is often the will's trick to keep us perpetually dissatisfied, forever reaching toward reflections of ourselves. We kiss, not the beloved, but our own projected hunger-given flesh. The ancients called it enchantment. Today, psychology names it projection. What face are you painting with your own hidden hungers right now? What screen have you made of the person closest to you? And what movie of your own making are you watching there in the dark? Every museum closes eventually, but the exhibits we create from other people's souls, those remain open all night, admission free. A man stands before a clockmaker's workshop, holding a key that opens nothing. Behind him, every clock in the city has stopped at the moment she said goodbye, that frozen instant when time betrays you. When the universe pauses mid-breath and you realize you've been living inside someone else's rhythm for so long, you forgot how to make your own hours move. We call it heartbreak, but what if it's something far more dangerous? The discovery that you were never the author of your own time. The clockmaker emerges from shadows thick as velvet, his fingers stained with decades of oil and tiny gears. His workshop breathes around them, walls lined with hundreds of timepieces. Grandfather clocks that tower like cathedral spires, delicate pocket watches that tick like metal hearts, modern digital displays that blink red numbers into the darkness. But every single one has stopped. The air thrums with the weight of suspended seconds. "She was your rhythm," the clockmaker says, his voice carrying the grinding sound of wheels that will never turn again. He gestures to a magnificent clock at the workshop's center. Its face is a perfect circle of midnight blue, constellations marking the hours instead of numbers. "You gave me your heartbeat to power this, remember? Thought love would keep it running forever." The man stares at the key in his palm. It's warm, pulsing like something alive. Around the workshop, he begins to notice other stopped clocks bearing familiar faces in their glass. His father's approval in the pendulum of a grandfather clock that ceased swinging years ago. His mother's expectations frozen in the mechanism of an ornate mantel clock. His ex-wife's disappointment crystallized in the cracked face of what was once their anniversary gift. The clockmaker runs his finger along the edge of a workbench scattered with dismantled timepieces. "Funny thing about borrowed time," he murmurs. Eventually, the lender wants it back. And then you discover you never learned to tick on your own. The man approaches his constellation clock. Through its glass face, he can see the intricate mechanism inside, but where his heart should be driving the gears, there's only empty space. He lifts the key, and for a moment, the workshop holds its breath. But the key fits nothing. It opens nothing, because the lock was always inside him. And he threw away that key the first time he decided someone else's approval mattered more than his own pulse. One by one, the stopped clocks begin to crumble into dust. The man watches decades of borrowed time fall away like ash, until only the empty workshop remains. In the silence, he hears it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of his own heartbeat, keeping time to no rhythm but its own. This is learned helplessness, the psychological cage we build from repeated failures, failed attempts to control outcomes that were never ours to control. Discovered by Martin Seligman through experiments with dogs who stopped trying to escape electric shocks even when escape became possible, learned helplessness manifests in modern life as the paralysis of perfectionism, the exhaustion of people-pleasing, the quiet resignation that says, "Why try?" It appears in workers who stop innovating after too many rejected ideas, in lovers who stop expressing needs after too many dismissals, in dreamers who stop dreaming after too many doors close. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the will's most insidious trap, teaching us that our suffering comes from external circumstances rather than our own internal surrender to helplessness. He believed that most human misery stems from wanting to control what cannot be controlled while abandoning the one thing we can, our own response to life's inevitable pain. In myth, it was a curse of paralysis. In you, it's the habit you can't see, learned helplessness. When did you stop winding your own clock? What rhythm have you been dancing to that was never your song to begin with? And what would your own heartbeat sound like if you finally let yourself hear it? Some keys are meant to rust unused. Some locks are meant to be broken from the inside. A woman enters a shop that sells mirrors, but every reflection shows her as someone else. The merchant smiles with too many teeth and asks which version of herself she'd like to buy. You've stood in this shop before, every morning when you decide which face to wear to work, which laugh to practice for the party tonight, which version of your story to tell the person asking how you've been. We think we're being adaptable, but what if we're just running a marketplace where our authentic self is the one item never for sale? The mirror merchant's shop stretches impossibly deep, its walls lined with reflective surfaces of every conceivable material. Silver-backed glass, polished obsidian, still water captured in frames, sheets of beaten metal that throw back distorted truths. Each mirror costs a different price. The one that shows her as successful demands her genuine laughter as payment. The one that reflects her as loved requires her actual tears. The mirror that makes her appear confident asks for her real fears in exchange. The woman moves through the shop like a ghost haunting her own life. In one mirror, she sees herself as the daughter her parents wanted, obedient, accomplished, empty behind the eyes. In another, she appears as the lover her ex-husband needed, diminished, apologetic, folded into herself like origami that's been crumpled and flattened too many times. A third reflection shows her as the friend everyone expects, endlessly available, never needing anything, smiling while something inside her starves. Most customers, the merchant says, polishing a hand mirror that gleams like captured moonlight, think they're shopping for mirrors, but mirrors only show what's already there. What I'm really selling is the permission to forget who you used to be before you learned that love was a performance review. She reaches toward her favorite reflection, the one where she appears fearless, radiant, whole, but her hand passes through the glass like it's water. The merchant chuckles, a sound like wind chimes made from broken promises. That one's not for sale, I'm afraid. That's just the mirror showing you what you looked like before you started collecting other people's definitions of worthiness. Behind each mirror, she glimpses the same shadowy figure, herself, but raw, unpolished, authentic. The figure mouths words she can't hear through the glass, presses palm to palm with her from the other side. The woman realizes with growing horror that she is not the customer in this shop. She is the inventory, and every mirror she's ever bought has been another barrier between her and the shadow self who's been trying to reach her for years. The merchant hands her a bill. The price for all these borrowed reflections is written in her own handwriting, one authentic self, paid in full. This is the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations, first described by Carl Jung as the compromise between who we are and what others need us to be. The persona appears in corporate culture as the professional self that slowly consumes the person underneath. In social media, as the curated identity that becomes more real than reality. In relationships, as the endless shape-shifting that leaves us wondering who we were before we started performing love. What begins as social adaptation becomes a prison where we're both the guard and the prisoner. Schopenhauer warned that the will tricks us into believing external approval can fill the void within us, leading us to construct elaborate facades that become more solid than the self they were meant to protect. He saw through the social theater to the suffering soul beneath, the one who trades authenticity for acceptance until they can no longer tell the difference between the performance and the performer. The ancients called it shape-shifting. Today, psychology names it the persona. Which reflection have you been buying at the cost of your true face? What would happen if you stopped paying the merchant and let all those borrowed mirrors shatter? What do you think you'd see in the empty frames? Every mask eventually cracks. But sometimes, that's when the light finally gets in. A man builds walls around his heart, so perfectly transparent that he cannot see them himself. Only when others stop approaching does he realize he's become unreachable. This is the cruelest architecture of all. The barriers we construct from past wounds, each one invisible to us but solid as stone to everyone else. We think we're protecting ourselves, but what if we're just building tombs and calling them sanctuaries? The architect works by moonlight in a garden where roses grow through the bones of ancient lovers. His tools are made from crystallized tears and sharpened disappointments. Around him, the transparent walls rise, each panel forged from a different betrayal, a different moment when trust cracked like ice under the weight of human failing. He cannot see what he builds, but his hands know the work. They have been building these walls for decades. The first wall materializes from his childhood, gossamer thin but unbreachable, woven from the silence that followed his father's leaving. The second rises from adolescence, built from the mockery of classmates who turned his vulnerability into a weapon against him. Another emerges from his first love's departure, constructed from the realization that forever is just another word people use until they find someone better. Through his invisible fortress, he watches other people approach and mysteriously turn away. Lovers drift toward him like ships drawn to a lighthouse, only to crash against barriers they cannot see. Friends begin conversations that somehow never deepen, their words echoing strangely in the space between them. He tells himself they lack persistence, that they don't really want to know him, but the garden knows better. The roses growing through the ancient bones whisper the truth he cannot hear. That protection and isolation are the same thing, just viewed from different sides of the same transparent wall. The architect pauses in his work and notices something troubling. The walls have grown so high and numerous that he can no longer remember which direction leads out. He has become both the prisoner and the warden of his own invisible penitentiary. In the distance, he can hear laughter, conversation, the sound of human connection, but it reaches him as if from another world, filtered through layers of crystallized caution. A single rose manages to grow through the transparent barrier nearest his heart. Its thorns are sharper than his tools, its petals more fragile than his fears. The architect reaches for it, and his hand passes through his own wall like smoke. For a moment, he understands. The barriers were never keeping others out. They were keeping him in, sealed away from his own capacity to risk, to trust, to be wounded, and heal anyway. The walls begin to sing, a low, mournful sound that carries the frequency of every person who tried to reach him and gave up. The architect finally sees his creation, a labyrinth of transparent suffering, each wall a memorial to love, lost before it could begin. This is emotional unavailability, the psychological fortress we build from trauma and disappointment, studied extensively by attachment theorists like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. It manifests in modern relationships as the person who's always working on themselves, instead of being vulnerable with others. In professional settings, as the leader who creates intimacy through distance. In friendships, as the person everyone knows, but no one really knows. What begins as protection becomes a pattern of pushing away the very connection we crave. Schopenhauer believed that isolation was both a symptom and a cause of human suffering, that the will drives us toward others for fulfillment, while our wounds teach us that others are the source of our deepest pain. He saw this contradiction as one of existence's cruelest jokes. We need what we fear most. In myth, it was the curse of untouchability. In you, It's the habit you can't see, emotional unavailability. What invisible walls have you built so well that even you can't see them anymore? Who have you been protecting yourself from? Others, or your own dangerous capacity to love without guarantees? Every prison has a door, but sometimes the key is made from the willingness to be hurt again. A woman discovers a map that shows every path she never took. Each route glows with the life she might have lived, and in following one, she disappears from the life she chose. This is the most beautiful trap of consciousness, the ability to see not just what is, but what could have been. We think imagination is a gift, but what if it's also a curse that keeps us living everywhere except where we are? The cartographer's studio exists in the space between decisions, where all possibilities remain equally true. Maps cover every surface, not of places, but of potential lives. Here, the chart showing her life, if she had stayed with her first love, complete with the children who were never born, and the small house by the lake they never bought. There, the route she would have taken if she'd been brave enough to move to Paris at 23, with markers showing the cafe where she would have written her novel and the bridge where she would have scattered her mother's ashes. The woman runs her fingers along the glowing pathways, each one warm with unlived experience. The map of her academic life pulses with lectures never given, students never taught, discoveries never made. The business map shows the company she almost started, its success measured in opportunities taken rather than risks avoided. Most painful of all, the map of herself as a mother, its territories marked with lullabies unsung and first steps unseen. She begins to follow one path, the one where she was fearless. As her finger traces the route, she feels herself dissolving into possibility. Her actual apartment fades around her. The career she built evaporates. The relationships she cultivated become whispers. She is becoming the ghost of her unlived life, trading substance for potential, reality for the seductive promise of what if. But as she nearly disappears completely into possibility, she glimpses something that stops her cold, another map, hidden beneath all the rest. This one shows the life she actually lived, not glowing with potential, but marked with the deep, rich colors of experience actually felt, the pain of her real heartbreaks, earned through genuine risk, the joy of her actual successes, weighted with effort and time, the love she chose to give, even knowing it could be lost. The cartographer emerges from the shadows, her own form flickering between all the lives she might have lived. Most people, she says, her voice echoing with infinite regret, think the unexplored paths are more beautiful because they never had to walk them. No stones in those shoes, no rain on those roads. But maps aren't journeys, child. They're just pictures of places that exist only if you choose not to go anywhere else. The woman withdraws her finger from the glowing paths. Around her, the unlived lives fade back to their proper translucency, visible but not solid, possible but not real. She sees now that the most detailed map in the room is the one that shows where she actually is, complex, imperfect, but earned through the 1,000 small choices that brought her here. The studio dissolves, leaving her standing in her own life. For the first time in years, she feels the weight of being exactly where she is, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. This is rumination, the psychological habit of replaying past events and rehearsing future scenarios until we lose touch with present reality. Identified by Susan Nolan Hoeksema's research, Rumination appears in modern life as the endless scrolling through social media that makes us feel everyone else's life is more interesting than our own. The paralysis of analysis that keeps us researching options instead of choosing any. The nostalgic dwelling on better times that prevents us from making better times now. What masquerades as thoughtfulness becomes a form of mental imprisonment. Schopenhauer recognized this torture of consciousness, the way the will uses our imagination against us, making us suffer not just from what is, but from everything that isn't. He believed that most human misery comes from living everywhere except the present moment, haunted by regrets about the past and anxieties about futures that exist only in our minds. The ancients called it the curse of Tantalus. Today, psychology names it rumination. Which unlived life has been haunting you so completely that you've forgotten to live the one you actually have? What map have you been studying so intently that you stop noticing the ground beneath your feet? Every path not taken remains perfect in its untaken state, but only the road you're walking can take you anywhere real. The architecture of self-deception crumbles not through force, but through recognition. Each fable, a mirror held up to the patterns that keep us trapped in beautiful prisons of our own making. Schopenhauer's curse was seeing too clearly, understanding that love often begins with projection, that heartbreak reveals our learned helplessness, that our personas become more real than our authentic selves, that our protection mechanisms isolate us from the very connection we seek, that our capacity for imagination can trap us everywhere except where we are. But perhaps the curse contains its own cure. In recognizing these patterns, we find the thread that leads out of the labyrinth, not to a place without suffering. Schopenhauer would laugh at such naivety, but to a place where our suffering serves something larger than itself, where our wounds become doorways, where our broken mirrors reflect not who others need us to be, but who we are brave enough to become. The blade hidden in every kiss cuts both ways. It severs us from illusion and opens us to what lies beneath, the raw, impossible, necessary work of being human in a world that offers no guarantees except the guarantee that nothing lasts. Not our pain, not our joy, not the careful walls we build around our hearts. In the end, we are all cartographers of unlived lives, architects of invisible prisons, mirror merchants selling reflections of ourselves back to ourselves. But sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, we set down our tools and our maps and our masks, and we simply stand where we are, present in our own experience, accountable to our own hearts, available to the terrible and beautiful mystery of being exactly who we are, exactly where we are, exactly when we are. The curse and the cure are the same thing, seen from different sides of the same transparent wall.